For my birthday, my son gifted me an expensive bottle of wine. The next morning he asked, "So, did you like it?" I replied, "I gave it to our neighbor. He really knows his wine." Silence. Then he shouted, "Are you kidding me?" It started on my 55th birthday, a Thursday in October. The air outside had that crisp, clean scent of autumn, the kind that makes you feel like new beginnings are possible, even when you're halfway through your 50s. I remember the light that morning, how it streamed through the kitchen window and fell across the oak table, illuminating the microscopic dust motes dancing in the air. It was a peaceful morning, deceptively so. My wife, Sarah, had made my favorite breakfast: pancakes with real maple syrup and a side of crispy bacon. She was humming a little tune that was slightly off-key but familiar, something she did when she was in a good mood. She slid the plate in front of me with a smile that still, after 30 years of marriage, made my stomach do a little flip. "Happy birthday, honey," she said, her voice warm like honey. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, her perfume a faint cloud of lavender and vanilla, a scent I had associated with home for as long as I could remember. Our life was good, or at least I was convinced it was. We had a beautiful house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with manicured lawns and friendly waves from neighbors. I had a stable career as a civil engineer, a job that didn't set my soul on fire, but provided a comfortable, predictable life. We had one son, Leo, who was 21 and, in my eyes, the best thing we had ever done. Leo came downstairs a few minutes later, his hair a mess from sleep, but he had a wide grin on his face. "Happy birthday, Dad." He was holding a tall, slender box wrapped in simple, elegant navy blue paper. He placed it on the table next to my plate. "This is for you." I looked at him, then at the box. I wasn't a man for extravagant gifts. A new set of drill bits for my workshop, a good book, maybe a comfortable sweater, that was my speed. But the box looked serious, important. I carefully peeled back the tape and slid the contents out. It was a bottle. A very heavy, dark green glass bottle with a deep punt at the bottom and a simple, cream-colored label. The label was handwritten in beautiful calligraphy. Somerset Valley Orchards, 1998 harvest. It was a bottle of rare, aged, sparkling cider, the kind of thing connoisseurs talk about in hushed, reverent tones. I knew, just by looking at it, that it must have cost a fortune. I looked at Leo, my eyebrows raised. "Leo, this is a lot," I managed to say. He just shrugged, a proud look on his face. "You deserve it, Dad. You've worked hard your whole life. It's time you enjoyed some of the finer things." I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I couldn't tell the difference between a $10 bottle of store-brand sparkling juice and something like this. To me, it was just fancy fizz. But I saw the look in his eyes. He was so proud to be able to give me something like this. So I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you, son. This is incredible. We'll have to open it for a special occasion." He nodded, but his smile seemed to flicker for just a second. "Or you could just enjoy it," he said. "You know, whenever." We finished our breakfast with easy conversation, the bottle sitting on the counter like a silent, expensive guest. Later that day, Sarah reminded me about her plans for the evening. "Don't forget, I have that charity gala tonight for the Children's Art Foundation," she said while clearing the table. "Brenda is picking me up around 7. I'll probably be late, so don't wait up." It was a common occurrence. Sarah was on the board of a few local charities, always attending events, luncheons, and galas. She thrived in those social settings, a butterfly flitting from one conversation to another. her laughter echoing in rooms filled with important people. I, on the other hand, was a homebody. My idea of a perfect evening was tinkering in my woodshop in the garage, the scent of sawdust in the air, the satisfying hum of a power saw in my hands. It was my sanctuary. So I just nodded. Have fun, honey. Don't worry about me. The rest of the day was beautifully ordinary. I went to my workshop and spent a few hours sanding down a cherry wood bookshelf I was making for our living room. I loved the feel of the wood, how it transformed from a rough, splintery plank into something smooth and silky under my fingertips. It was tangible, real. You put in the work, and you saw the results. Life wasn't always so straightforward. As evening fell, I watched Sarah get ready. She wore a deep blue dress that matched her eyes and a string of pearls I'd given her for our 25th anniversary. She looked stunning, a stranger almost, more beautiful than the woman who had made me pancakes that morning. She checked her reflection one last time, a little nervous flutter in her movements. "How do I look?" she asked, turning to me. "You look like a movie star," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, that brilliant, room-lighting smile, and then a car horn honked outside. "That's Brenda. I'll see you later, Frank. Love you." She kissed me quickly and was out the door, her lavender and vanilla scent lingering behind. I ate a simple dinner of leftover roast chicken and watched some TV, the house feeling vast and empty without her. Around 9:30, I turned off the lights and headed upstairs. I was tired. It had been a good birthday, a peaceful birthday. I fell asleep easily, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. I was deep in a dream. Something about fishing on a lake from my childhood. When the shrill ring of my phone on the nightstand jolted me awake, I fumbled for it, my heart pounding in my chest. Phone calls after midnight are never good news. I squinted at the screen. It was Sarah. I answered immediately, my voice thick with sleep. "Sarah, are you okay? What's wrong?" There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the tinny sound of music and chatter in the background. "Frank? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry to wake you." Her voice was high-pitched, a little breathless. "Listen, something crazy happened. Brenda had a family emergency. She had to leave an hour ago. And I completely lost track of time talking to some of the donors. My phone died. I just managed to borrow a charger. Could you possibly come and get me?" I feel terrible asking. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. My mind was slowly piecing things together. "Where are you?" I asked. "The Grand Excelsior Hotel, downtown, in the main ballroom. I'm so sorry, Frank." I sighed. It was a 40-minute drive downtown and another 40 minutes back. But what was I going to do? Say no? "Okay," I said, my voice flat. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 45 minutes. You're a lifesaver. Thank you. I'll be waiting out front." She hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, the silence of the house pressing in on me. A little seed of annoyance was planted in my gut. It wasn't a big deal, of course. Husbands pick up their wives. It happens. But something felt off. Brenda having an emergency and not even telling Sarah she was leaving? Sarah, who was surgically attached to her phone, letting it die? It was a little thing. A tiny, insignificant tear in the fabric of our normal life. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and walked out into the cold night air, that little seed of unease already starting to sprout. The drive downtown was quiet, the highway illuminated by the lonely glow of streetlights. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show where people called in with their problems. Usually, I found it amusing, a glimpse into the chaotic lives of strangers. Tonight, it just felt like noise. My mind was replaying the phone call with Sarah. Her voice, it wasn't just breathless, it was strained, like she was acting. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. I was tired, grumpy about being woken up. I was reading too much into it. That's what I told myself anyway. I pulled up to the Grand Excelsior Hotel just before 1 in the morning. It was one of those old, opulent buildings with a massive canopy and a revolving door that spun like a carousel. A few people in tuxedos and fancy dresses were milling about, waiting for valets or ride shares. I scanned the entrance, but I didn't see Sarah. I parked across the street where I could see the main doors clearly and decided to wait. I sent her a quick text. "I'm here, parked across the street." No reply. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The crowd from the gala thinned out until it was just a few stragglers. Still no Sarah. I started to feel a familiar frustration creeping in, the kind you feel when you're waiting for someone who doesn't seem to respect your time. I called her phone. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Her phone must have died again, I muttered to myself, the annoyance growing. Another 15 minutes crawled by. I was starting to get genuinely worried. What if something had happened inside? I was about to get out of the car and go in when I saw her. She emerged from the revolving door, not alone. She was with a man. He was tall, lean, with silver hair that was perfectly styled. He wore an expensive-looking dark suit, no tie, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. He looked smooth, confident. He was laughing at something Sarah had said, and he placed a hand on the small of her back as they walked toward the curb. It was a familiar gesture, almost proprietary. I felt a hot flash of something. I didn't know what it was. Jealousy? Suspicion? I just knew I didn't like it. They stood there for a moment, talking. Sarah was animated, touching his arm as she spoke. He leaned in close, his face just inches from hers. From my vantage point across the street, in the dark belly of my car, it looked intimate. Too intimate. Then Sarah glanced around, her eyes scanning the street. I saw her spot my car. Her posture changed instantly. She took a small step back from the man, her smile becoming a little more rigid, more polite. She waved at me, a quick, almost frantic little gesture. The man looked over in my direction, his expression unreadable. He said something to her, she nodded, and then she hurried across the street toward me, leaving him standing there. He watched her for a moment before turning and walking away down the block. She opened the passenger door and slid in, bringing a gust of cold air and her lavender perfume with her. Oh, Frank, thank God. I am so sorry. You will not believe what happened. She launched into a story, a fast, rambling narrative about how she'd been cornered by the foundation's biggest donor, a woman named Mrs. Albright, who just wouldn't let her go. She talked and talked, her hands fluttering as she spoke. She didn't seem to notice my silence. I just kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Who was that man? I asked, my voice coming out colder than I intended. She stopped talking mid-sentence. Who? Oh, that was Mark. Mark Peterson. He's a financial advisor. He's thinking of making a major contribution to the foundation. I was just networking, you know. It's part of the gig. She tried to laugh it off, but it sounded hollow. He put his hand on your back, I said, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. She was quiet for a beat. Frank, don't be silly. It was nothing. People do that. It's just a friendly gesture. It didn't look friendly to me, I said, my voice low, the car filled with a tense, heavy silence. We drove for several miles without another word. I could feel her looking at me, but I refused to turn my head. My mind was racing, connecting invisible dots. The late-night calls she'd started taking in the other room, claiming they were from the West Coast chapter of the charity. The new, expensive-looking handbag she'd bought last month, saying she'd gotten it on a major sale. The way she'd been so distant lately, physically present but emotionally a million miles away. I had attributed it all to stress, to her being busy with her charity work. But now, seeing her with that man, it all felt different. It felt like a lie. When we got home, she tried to pretend that everything was normal. "I'm going to make some tea. Do you want some?" she asked, her voice artificially bright. "No," I said, and went straight to my workshop. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there in the dark, the smell of sawdust and wood stain filling my lungs. I ran my hand over the smooth surface of the bookshelf I'd been working on. Something I had built with my own hands. Something solid and real and true. It felt like the only real thing in my life at that moment. I thought about the 30 years we had spent together. The struggles in the beginning, the joy of buying our first home, the terrifying, wonderful day Leo was born. I had built my entire world around her, around our family. Now, a crack had appeared in the foundation, and I was terrified that if I looked too closely, the whole structure would collapse. I stayed in the garage for over an hour, just standing in the dark, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. When I finally went back inside, the house was quiet. A cup of tea sat, untouched and cold, on the kitchen counter. I walked upstairs. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the soft, even sound of her breathing. She was asleep, or pretending to be. I laid down on my side of the bed, as far away from her as I could get, and stared into the darkness. Sleep felt like an impossible luxury. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the silver-haired man, his hand on my wife's back. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt utterly and completely alone. The expensive bottle of sparkling cider was still on the kitchen counter, its fancy label glinting in the faint moonlight coming through the window. It seemed to be mocking me, a symbol of a celebration that now felt like a fraud. The next morning, the sun rose just as it always did, but everything felt different. The light filtering into the kitchen didn't seem cheerful. It seemed harsh, clinical, exposing every crack and flaw. I had barely slept, dozing off in fits and starts, waking up each time with a jolt of anxiety. Sarah was already up, sitting at the table with a coffee cup cradled in her hands. She was wearing her favorite silk robe, the one I bought her for her birthday last year. She looked tired, her eyes puffy. She gave me a small, hesitant smile as I walked in. "Morning," she said softly. I just grunted in response and went to the coffee maker. The silence between us was a physical presence, a heavy weight in the room. I didn't know what to say. How do you ask the person you've loved for 30 years if they are lying to you? How do you voice a suspicion so monstrous it could shatter everything you've ever known? So I said nothing. I poured my coffee and stood leaning against the counter, looking out the window at our backyard. The oak tree we had planted when Leo was 5 was shedding its leaves, a slow, silent surrender to the changing season. It felt fitting. My eyes landed on the bottle of aged cider sitting on the counter. It was right there, next to the fruit bowl, looking completely out of place in the morning after wreckage of my emotions. I stared at it. Leo's gift, a gift to celebrate my life. A life that suddenly felt like a carefully constructed illusion. In that moment, I hated the bottle. I hated its elegance, its expense, its symbolism of a finer life that felt hollow and false. I didn't want it in my house. I didn't want to look at it anymore. Then, an idea came to me. Our next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was a retired history professor. A widower in his late 70s, he was a kind, gentle soul who spent his days gardening and reading. He was also a man who genuinely appreciated the finer things. He had a small collection of rare books and was known to enjoy a good, complex beverage, often telling me stories about special vintages and harvests he'd tried over the years. He would appreciate this bottle. He would understand it in a way I never could. Giving it to him felt like the right thing to do. It was a way to get it out of my sight, to pass on its supposed value to someone who would actually find joy in it. It was a small act of defiance against the suffocating tension in my own home. I picked up the bottle. It was cold and heavy in my hand. Sarah watched me, a questioning look on her face. "What are you doing with that?" she asked. "I'm giving it to Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice even. "He'll get a real kick out of it. He knows his stuff." I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out the back door, across our lawn, and knocked on Mr. Henderson's kitchen door. He opened it, a welcoming smile on his face. "Frank, good morning. What can I do for you?" I held out the bottle. "Mr. Henderson, this is for you. It was a birthday gift, but honestly, it's wasted on me. I know you'll appreciate it properly." His eyes widened as he took the bottle, his hands cradling it like a precious artifact. He read the label, and a low whistle escaped his lips. My word, Frank. A 1998 Somerset Valley. This is the stuff of legends. Are you absolutely sure? "I'm sure," I said. For the first time that morning, I felt a flicker of relief. "Enjoy it." He was beaming. "Thank you, my boy. This is an extraordinary kindness. I'll be sure to savor every drop." I walked back to my house feeling lighter, as if I'd offloaded a heavy burden. The act of giving the bottle away felt like I was taking back some small piece of control. I stepped back into my kitchen. Sarah was still at the table, her coffee untouched. She was staring at the empty space on the counter where the bottle had been. At that moment, Leo came clattering down the stairs, yawning. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, looking every bit the college kid home for the weekend. He grabbed a box of cereal from the pantry and turned around, a cheerful look on his face. "Morning, guys," he said. Then he looked at me. His eyes were bright, expectant. "So, Dad," he started, a small smile playing on his lips. "Did you like it? The cider?" The question hung in the air, thick with a significance I couldn't yet understand. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth doing little to soothe the cold knot in my stomach. I looked from Leo's hopeful face to Sarah's pale, anxious one. "I gave it to our neighbor," I replied, my voice calm. "Mr. Henderson, he really knows his stuff." The change was instantaneous and terrifying. For a split second, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Leo's cheerful expression dissolved. His face went blank with disbelief, then contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a hot, red tide. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the cereal box crushing under his grip. "What?" he whispered, his voice dangerously low. Then his voice erupted, a raw, ragged shout that echoed through the quiet house, shattering the morning peace. "Are you kidding me?" It wasn't the sound of a disappointed son whose father didn't appreciate a gift. It was something deeper. It was the sound of a carefully laid plan combusting. It was the sound of betrayal. He stared at me, his eyes blazing with a pain and an anger so profound it stunned me into silence. And then he looked at his mother. The accusation in his gaze was so potent, so venomous, that Sarah physically flinched, shrinking back in her chair as if he had struck her. In that horrifying moment, in the wreckage of my son's scream, I knew. I knew this was never about a bottle of cider. It was about something so much worse. And the truth, the ugly, devastating truth, was about to come out right here, in our sunlit kitchen. The silence that followed Leo's shout was more deafening than the scream itself. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of dread. Leo stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on his mother. I looked from my son's anguished face to my wife's terrified one, and my mind, which had been foggy with suspicion, suddenly became crystal clear. It was like a camera lens snapping into sharp focus. Every little detail from the past few months clicked into place, forming a picture so ugly I could barely stand to look at it. "Leo, what's going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't look at me. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Sarah. "You were supposed to see it," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "He was supposed to open it. With you. You were supposed to see the label." He finally turned to me, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "That bottle," he said, his voice cracking. "That specific bottle. The 1998 Somerset Valley, that's his favorite, his holy grail." I was confused. Whose favorite? Mr. Henderson's? "No!" Leo almost screamed the word. "Not Henderson's, Mark's." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Mark, the silver-haired man from the hotel, the man with his hand on my wife's back. Sarah made a small, choking sound. "Leo, please don't," she whispered, her face as white as a sheet. But Leo was a dam that had burst. The words came pouring out of him, a torrent of pain he had been holding back for months. "I heard you, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. 2 weeks ago. You were on the phone in the study. You thought I was out. You were talking to him. You were telling him how you were going to get him that exact bottle for his collection. You described it perfectly. A special gift. Something to celebrate your new beginning. Every word was a nail in the coffin of my marriage. A new beginning. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and I didn't recognize the woman sitting at my kitchen table. Her face was a mask of panic and guilt. "I found the emails, Mom," Leo continued, his voice relentless. "Months ago. I was using your laptop for a school paper and your email was open. I saw the messages, the hotel reservations, the talk about our future, the plans." My legs felt weak. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. The whole world was tilting on its axis. My son knew. My son had been carrying this burden, this poison, all by himself. I didn't know what to do, Leo said, his voice finally breaking. He was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. How could I tell Dad? How could I blow up our whole family? So I came up with a plan. A stupid plan. I used my savings, all the money I had for my semester abroad, and I found the bottle online. I bought it before you could. I was going to give it to Dad. I thought if you saw it, here in his hands, your reaction would tell him everything. He wouldn't have to hear it from me. He would just know. I understood now. The fury. The scream. It wasn't about the gift. It was about his desperate, misguided attempt to protect me, to expose the truth without having to speak the words himself. And I, in my ignorance, had walked right over to Mr. Henderson's house and handed his plan, his evidence, his sacrifice, away. I finally turned my full attention to Sarah. She was sobbing, her face in her hands. "Frank," she started, her voice muffled. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. The shock had numbed me, encased me in a block of ice. Explain the lies? The hotel rooms? Explain him? She looked up, her eyes red and pleading. "It's not what you think. It just happened. I was lonely. You're always in your workshop. You're always so quiet. Mark, he listened to me. He made me feel seen." The excuse was so cliché, so pathetic it was almost laughable. She was trying to blame me, to shift the responsibility for her betrayal onto my shoulders. A cold, hard anger began to burn through the numbness. "Lonely?" I repeated the word, tasting its absurdity. "You were lonely in our home, with our son, in the life I worked my entire life to give us." The argument that followed was a blur of ugly words and uglier truths. It all came out. The affair had been going on for nearly a year. Mark wasn't just a potential donor. He was a wealth manager she'd met at a luncheon. And it was worse than just an affair. As Leo, now my grim-faced ally, revealed more of what he'd found, the true depth of the deception became clear. They weren't just planning a future. They were funding it with my money. Sarah had been siphoning money from our joint savings account into a separate account under her maiden name. The new business venture she'd talked about on the car ride home was a shell corporation Mark had set up. They were planning to drain our finances and disappear. The charity galas, the late nights, it was all a cover. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a calculated financial assassination. It was a plot to strip me of everything I had ever worked for. In the end, there was nothing left to say. The kitchen was a war zone, littered with the shrapnel of our broken family. Sarah just sat there, weeping. There were no more excuses, no more lies left to tell. "Pack a bag," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I want you to go to your sister's. I need you out of this house, now." She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock, as if she couldn't believe I would actually do it. But the man she had been married to for 30 years was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man whose heart had been pulverized into dust. She slowly got up and walked out of the room. Leo and I stood in the silence, not looking at each other. I walked over to my son and put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched at first, then leaned into my touch, and his whole body started to shake with silent, gut-wrenching sobs. I pulled him into a hug, holding my 21-year-old son like he was a little boy again. And I stood there, in the ruins of my life, holding the only thing that was still real. The sun was fully up now, streaming into the kitchen, but it brought no warmth. It only illuminated the dust. The sound of the front door clicking shut was unnervingly soft. It wasn't a slam, not an angry departure. Just a quiet, final click that seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the house. Sarah was gone. Leo's sobs slowly subsided, replaced by shuddering breaths. He pulled away from me, wiping his face with the back of his hand, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked ashamed, as if he were the one who had done something wrong. The weight of his secret, the months of silent agony he had endured for my sake, settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. I had been living in a fool's paradise, content in my workshop, sanding my pieces of cherry wood, while my son was fighting a war on his own. The thought was a fresh wave of nausea. "It's not your fault, Leo," I said, my voice hoarse. "You hear me? None of this is on you." He just nodded, a jerky, uncertain movement. He looked around the kitchen, at the pristine countertops and the sunlit floor, as if seeing it for the first time. It was a stage, and the play was over. The actors had left, but the set remained, a hollow reminder of the fiction we had been living. I couldn't stand being in that room for another second. It felt contaminated by the morning's revelations, every surface coated in a thin film of deceit. "I'm going to the workshop," I mumbled, more to myself than to him. It was a retreat, a flight to the only place that still felt like mine. Leo didn't respond, just sank into one of the kitchen chairs, staring at the empty space where the bottle of cider had been. He looked small, a child lost in the wreckage of his parents' mistakes. The walk across the backyard felt long. The air was cool, and the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves was strong. It was the smell of things ending. I slid the heavy wooden door of the workshop open and stepped inside. The familiar scent of sawdust, wood glue, and varnish was usually a comfort, a balm to my soul. Today, it did nothing. The half-finished bookshelf stood in the center of the room, a monument to my ignorance. I had been sanding it down, making it perfect, while my life was being dismantled piece by piece. My eyes scanned the organized chaos of my sanctuary. Tools hung neatly on the pegboard walls, jars of screws and nails were lined up on shelves, and stacks of lumber leaned against the far wall. Everything had its place. Everything was logical, orderly, unlike my life. My gaze fell upon a small, metal filing cabinet tucked away in a corner underneath a workbench. It was where Sarah kept the paperwork for her charity work. Donor lists, event plans, expense reports. She'd claimed she needed a space away from the main house to focus. I had thought it was a sign of her dedication. Now I saw it for what it was, a hiding place. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I had never opened that cabinet. I respected her privacy, her passion. What a fool I had been. My hands were trembling as I pulled on the handle of the top drawer. It was locked. Of course it was. A small silver key was required, a key I had seen on her keychain 100 times but never thought twice about. But Sarah, in her hasty, tearful exit, must have forgotten everything. I looked around my workshop. I had tools to open anything. I took a small crowbar from the wall, the irony not lost on me. I was about to pry open the last vestiges of my life with the same tools I used to build it. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam of the drawer and pushed. The metal groaned in protest, then gave way with a sharp, ugly crack. The lock was broken. I pulled the drawer open. It was filled with file folders, neatly labeled. Gala planning, donor outreach, quarterly budget. It all looked so legitimate, so professional. I started pulling them out, one by one, my heart thumping a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. In the third folder, tucked behind a stack of glossy brochures for a children's art program, I found it. It wasn't a charity document. It was a folder labeled Somerset Properties, LLC. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, not from our joint account, but from an account I had never heard of, with a bank I didn't recognize. The account was in the name of that shell company Leo had mentioned. And the deposits? They were staggering. For the past 10 months, regular transfers had been made from our savings. Thousands of dollars at a time. Little bites, small enough to go unnoticed by a man who trusted his wife implicitly. But they added up. I flipped through the pages, my vision blurring. There were withdrawals, too. Payments to high-end restaurants I had never been to. Charges from a luxury hotel in the city, the same one where the gala was held. And then, at the very back of the folder, I found a printout. It was a real estate listing for a condominium, a modern glass-walled apartment overlooking the ocean, 2 states away. The price made me physically sick. It was nearly the entire value of our home, the home I had worked 35 years to pay off. At the bottom of the page, there was a handwritten note in Sarah's elegant script. Our new beginning. Can't wait. S. I dropped the papers onto the workbench. They scattered across the surface, a blizzard of white paper detailing my own execution. This wasn't just an affair. This was a heist, a long con. She wasn't just leaving me. She was planning to erase me. I sank onto a wooden stool, the crowbar still clutched in my hand. I stared at the bookshelf, at its smooth, perfect lines. I had been so focused on creating something beautiful and lasting, while the woman I loved was meticulously planning my destruction. The sun was high in the sky now, but in my workshop, in my heart, it was dark. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the soul, that the storm was just beginning. The days that followed were a gray, featureless blur. The house was a tomb. Leo and I moved around each other like ghosts, the silence between us filled with unspoken grief. We ate takeout food standing up in the kitchen, avoiding the table where our family had disintegrated. Every object in the house seemed to cry out with the memory of her. The silk robe hanging on the back of the bedroom door, the half-read book on her nightstand, the faint scent of her perfume that still clung to the pillows. I felt her absence like a phantom limb, an ache in a place where something used to be. I had packed all her immediate belongings into boxes and stored them in the garage, a sad museum of a life that was no longer mine. Leo had tried to help, his young face etched with a pain that was far too old for his years. We worked in silence, the only sound the screech of packing tape. At night, I couldn't sleep. I would lie in our bed, my bed now, and stare at the ceiling, my mind a relentless projector, playing a highlight reel of my own stupidity. Every business trip she had taken, every charity dinner that ran late, every vague explanation for her distraction. It was all so obvious now. I was a walking cliche, the trusting husband, the last to know. I felt a burning shame that was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. About a week after she left, on a Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was a sound so foreign, so intrusive, that both Leo and I froze. We hadn't had a visitor since the world ended. I opened the door to find Mr. Henderson standing on the porch, a small, covered plate in his hands. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Frank, my boy," he said warmly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. My daughter dropped off a homemade apple pie and I couldn't possibly eat it all myself. I thought of you." He held out the pie. I took it, my hands feeling clumsy and slow. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I managed to say. "That's very kind of you." "Nonsense," he said, waving a dismissive hand. He leaned in a little, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "I have to tell you, Frank, that sparkling cider, my goodness, it was transcendent. I opened it 2 nights ago, sat on my porch and watched the stars. Each sip was like a memory of a perfect autumn day. an experience I will not soon forget. Thank you again for such an incredible gift." His words were meant to be kind, but they were like tiny, sharp needles piercing my skin. I forced a smile that felt like a grimace. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Mr. Henderson. Truly." He nodded, his gaze sweeping past me into the quiet house. He seemed to notice the stillness, the oppressive silence. His smile faded slightly. "Is everything all right, Frank? I haven't seen Sarah's car all week." The direct question hung in the air. I could lie. I could make up some story about her visiting her sister, which was technically true, but I was done with lies. I was drowning in them. "She's left, Mr. Henderson," I said, the words tasting like rust. "We've separated." His face fell. All the warmth drained out of his expression, replaced by a deep, sincere sadness. "Oh, Frank, I am so terribly sorry to hear that. So terribly sorry." He was quiet for a moment, a man who understood loss. "You know," he said, his voice soft and hesitant, "I don't want to speak out of turn, but I did wonder sometimes." "Wonder what?" I asked, my voice flat. He looked uncomfortable, as if debating whether to continue. "Well, it was probably nothing. But on weekdays, sometimes, when you were at work, there was a car, a fancy silver car. It would park a few houses down the street. A man would get out and come to your door. I just assumed it was someone for Sarah's charity work, a donor, perhaps. He was always very well dressed." A cold dread washed over me. Mark, he had been here, in my house, while I was at work, providing the very money they were using to plan their escape. The audacity of it, the sheer, contemptuous arrogance, took my breath away. "He came here often?" I asked, needing to know. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "Once or twice a week, for the last few months. Usually in the middle of the day. They were always very discreet." Discreet. My neighbor had watched my wife's lover come and go from my home, and he had chalked it up to charity work. I didn't blame him. Why would he think otherwise? We were the perfect couple, in the perfect house, in the perfect neighborhood. We were a testament to the lie. "Thank you for the pie, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice strained. I needed him to leave. I needed to be alone with this new, disgusting piece of information. He seemed to understand. He patted my arm gently. "If you need anything, Frank, anything at all, a cup of sugar or an ear to bend, you know where I am." He turned and walked slowly back to his own house, leaving me standing in the doorway with a pie I would never eat and a truth that was getting heavier by the minute. He had been in my house. He had probably sat on my couch, drank from my glasses, walked through the rooms I had painted and repaired with my own 2 hands. The violation was absolute. I closed the door, placed the pie on the entry table, and walked back to the kitchen where Leo was still sitting, staring into space. He looked up at me. "Who was that?" he asked. "Mr. Henderson," I replied. I looked at my son, at the pain in his eyes that mirrored my own. And I knew that staying in this house, surrounded by the ghosts of our stolen life, was no longer an option. It was a mausoleum, and it was time to get out. The decision to call a lawyer was like stepping off a cliff. There was no going back. I found a name online, a firm in the city that specialized in complex divorces. The lawyer's name was Jessica Morales. Her picture on the website was stern, professional. She didn't look like someone who would tolerate nonsense. That's what I needed. I met her 2 days later in her office, a sterile, impersonal space on the 32nd floor of a glass tower. The view of the city was vast and indifferent. Jessica Morales was exactly as her picture promised. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a handshake that could crush walnuts. She listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. I told her everything. The gala, the silver-haired man, the bottle of cider, my son's discovery, the locked filing cabinet, the bank statements, the condominium. When I was finished, I felt hollowed out, exhausted. I pushed the folder with the documents from the Somerset Properties file across her polished mahogany desk. She opened it and began to read. Her focus absolute. She spent nearly 20 minutes silently examining the papers, her brow furrowed in concentration. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. Finally, she looked up at me. "Mr. Collins," she said, her voice calm and direct. "This is grand larceny. What your wife has done goes far beyond infidelity. This is a calculated, criminal conspiracy to defraud you of your assets." The words, spoken with such clinical precision, were both terrifying and validating. I wasn't just a heartbroken husband. I was a victim of a crime. "The good news," she continued, "is that she was sloppy, using a shell company registered in this state, transferring funds directly from a joint account. She left a trail a child could follow. We can freeze that account immediately. The bad news is that recovering the money that's already been spent will be a battle. And this man, Mark Peterson, we need to find out exactly who he is." The next few weeks were a descent into a hell made of paper. Jessica and her team were relentless. They subpoenaed bank records, phone records, and email accounts. The truth they uncovered was even worse than I had imagined. The affair was older, the financial deception deeper. Sarah hadn't just siphoned off our savings, she had taken out a second mortgage on our house. The documents were all there, with my signature forged in a passable imitation of my own handwriting. The money from that loan, a significant six-figure sum, had gone straight into the Somerset Properties account. They had been bleeding me dry from every possible angle. I sat in Jessica's office, staring at a spreadsheet she had prepared. It was a detailed accounting of my own ruin. The numbers swam before my eyes. The total amount they had taken was staggering. It was everything. My retirement, the college fund I had set up for my future grandchildren, the equity in my home. It was all gone. "She has left you with almost nothing but debt," Jessica said, her voice softer now, tinged with something that might have been pity. She and her partner were planning to file for divorce from their new, debt-free condo, leaving you to declare bankruptcy. The sheer coldness of it was what broke me. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a business plan. I had been her business, and she had liquidated her assets. I thought about the 30 years of my life I had given her. The sacrifices I had made, the late nights at work, the weekends spent fixing the leaky roof or building a deck in the backyard. I had done it all for us, for our future. And she had been planning this, with him all along. The shame I had felt before was replaced by a white-hot, purifying rage. I was no longer a victim. I was a man who had been robbed, and I wanted justice. "What do we do now?" I asked Jessica, my voice low and steady. Her expression hardened again, back to business. "Now, we fight," she said. "We file for divorce on the grounds of fraud. We press criminal charges. We go after her. We go after him. And we take back every single penny they stole from you. It will be long, it will be ugly, and it will be expensive. But we will win." I walked out of her office that day a different man. The grief was still there, a cold, hard stone in my chest. But now, it had a purpose. It was fuel. I drove home not to a mausoleum, but to a battleground. I was going to get my life back, or I was going to burn everything to the ground trying. That evening, Leo found me in the kitchen, poring over copies of the legal documents Jessica had given me. He looked at the mountain of paper, then at my face. "Is it bad?" he asked quietly. "It's bad," I said, without looking up. "But we're going to fix it." He pulled up a chair and sat down next to me, looking at the incomprehensible spreadsheets and legal jargon. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he understood that he was no longer alone in this fight. He was my son, and we were in this together. The legal battle began, and it was as ugly as Jessica had promised. Motions were filed, and letters were exchanged between lawyers. Sarah, through her attorney, denied everything. She painted me as a controlling, emotionally distant husband, and claimed the money she had taken was a fair separation of our marital assets. The lies were so audacious, so disconnected from reality, that they were almost breathtaking. She and Mark had hunkered down, lawyered up, and were prepared to fight dirty. The pressure was immense. I was working full-time, trying to manage the cascade of legal bills and attempting to hold myself together for Leo's sake. He had decided to take a semester off from college. "I'm not leaving you to go through this alone," he'd said, with a quiet determination that made my heart ache with pride and sorrow. We were a two-man army against the world. Some nights, the weight of it all felt like it was going to crush me. I'd lie awake, the numbers from the spreadsheet scrolling through my mind, and wonder if I had the strength to see it through. One evening, about a month into the legal proceedings, there was a knock on the door. It was late, after 9 o'clock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a woman standing on my porch, her face illuminated by the pale yellow light. For a second, I didn't recognize her. Then it clicked. It was Brenda, Sarah's best friend, the alibi for the night of the gala. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and she was nervously twisting the strap of her purse in her hands. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "Brenda?" I asked, confused. "What are you doing here?" "Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Can I come in for a minute, please? There's something I have to tell you." I hesitated. Brenda was part of that other life, a symbol of the web of lies Sarah had spun. But there was a raw desperation in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. I stepped aside and let her in. We stood awkwardly in the living room. She looked around at the boxes stacked against the walls, at the empty spaces on the mantel where family photos used to be. "I am so sorry, Frank," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea about any of it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice wary. She finally looked at me, and tears began to well in her eyes. "Sarah lied to me, to all of us. That night, the night of the gala. She called me that afternoon, told me she was feeling sick and couldn't go. She asked me to cover for her if anyone asked, to say I'd dropped her home early. She said you were worried about her and she didn't want to cause a fuss." Brenda took a shaky breath. "She's done that before. Used me as an excuse. I thought she was just, I don't know, avoiding a boring dinner or needed a night to herself. I never imagined this." She started to cry in earnest now, her shoulders shaking. "I got a letter from your lawyer today. A deposition request. I called Sarah to ask her what was going on, and she told me to lie. She wanted me to perjure myself. She told me to say that I was with her that night, that she was with me the whole time. She tried to make me a part of her crime." The pieces clicked into place. Sarah wasn't just a liar. She was willing to destroy her friends too. She was willing to implicate Brenda in a criminal investigation to save her own skin. She told me if I didn't, Brenda continued, her voice trembling with anger, she would tell my husband about something from a long time ago. Something I told her in confidence. She tried to blackmail me. The sheer venom of it shocked me. This was who my wife was. A blackmailer, a user, a woman who would burn everyone around her to stay warm. Brenda looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. I'm not going to lie for her, Frank. I won't do it. She's not the person I thought she was. This man, Mark, I've met him. She introduced him as her financial advisor. He was always so charming, so smooth. He fooled everyone. In that moment, my perception of Brenda shifted. She wasn't an enemy. She was another victim, caught in the blast radius of Sarah's implosion. She was another person who had been betrayed. She told me things, Brenda said, her voice dropping. Little things over the years. Complaints about money, fantasies about starting over somewhere new, somewhere glamorous. I thought it was just talk. But she mentioned him, Mark, a lot. She said he was helping her make smart investments. She handed me a piece of paper. It was a business card. This is him, she said. Mark Peterson, Peterson Wealth Management. It was the first time I had seen his full name, his company, in print. It was a solid, tangible piece of my enemy. It was a target. I looked at Brenda, at her tear-streaked, determined face. She was terrified, but she was doing the right thing. She was choosing truth over the twisted loyalty Sarah had demanded. An unexpected, fragile alliance was forming right here, in the ruins of my living room. I was still alone, but I wasn't the only one who had been deceived. And I knew, with a sudden surge of clarity, that Sarah had made a fatal mistake. She hadn't just betrayed her husband, she had betrayed her friends. And in a war like this, you need all the allies you can get.